Good evening. I'm Jay Sanders, the Executive Director of Artist Space, and it's my sincere pleasure to welcome you to tonight's conversation with Ishmael Reed and Justin Desmangles. This event is an important part of Till They Listen, Bill Gunn Directs America, an exhibition now on view at Artist Space through August 15th, which elucidates and honors the life and work of the filmmaker, playwright, novelist, and actor Bill Gunn. The exhibition was organized by Artist Space, Hilton Alves, Jake Perlin, and a committee of Gunn's collaborators and scholars, and we're deeply grateful for their incredible work. We could not be more excited for tonight's conversation. Ishmael Reed played an essential role in Bill Gunn's artistic life, publishing 2 books, Gunn's play Black Picture Show in 1975, and his novel Rhinestone Sharecropping in 1981, both released by Reed's company, I Read Books. They also collaborated on the legendary made-for-TV soap opera Personal Problems, which was written and produced by Reed and directed by Gunn. One of America's most significant literary figures, Ishmael Reed has published over 30 books of poetry, prose, essays, and plays, including the acclaimed novel Mumbo Jumbo, as well as penning hundreds of lyrics for musicians ranging from Taj Mahal to Macy Gray. His work is known for its satirical, ironic take on race and literary tradition, as well as its innovative postmodern techniques. Reed is Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley, and was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship and the Robert Kirch Award for Lifetime Achievement. Tonight, Ishmael Reed is joined by Justin Desmangles. Justin is chairman of the Before Columbus Foundation, administrator of the American Book Award, and the longtime host of the radio broadcast, New Day Jazz. A member of the board of directors of the Oakland Book Festival, Mr. Desmangles is also a program producer at the African American Center of the San Francisco Public Library. Thanks again for joining us, and without further ado, I'll turn things over to Ishmael and Justin.
Okay, Ishmael, I'd like to begin our discussion by talking about Bill Gunn's novel, Rhinestone Sharecropping, which you published as part of a series, I Read Books. I think if we begin there, it will help us talk in a more concrete way about some of the triumphs and victories in the film that you made together, Personal Problems. At a very early stage in the novel, Bill Gunn talks about his career in Hollywood, and I'll read directly from the book. One successful for a time, one not. I have nearly destroyed myself with this double-edged sword, which is called writing race for money. And of course, what he's talking about is that many of the most backwards and criminal stereotypes of the 18th and 19th century have remained persistent throughout American popular culture and entertainment right up until this day. And for film and television and theater writers who are Black, it's become a tool of the trade, a double-edged sword, as he has said, to write out of this bag. It's like, if you don't offer some of this nonsense, then you're not going to get any play among the representatives of the ruling culture. Now, a recent example of this came with the Pulitzer Prize to Katori Hall, who wrote a play about a Black man searching for the perfect recipe for chicken wings. A few years ago, Lee Daniels featured Precious in his film running down the street with a bucket of fried chicken. Now, most of those images and archetypes that I mentioned that concern Black men are often organized libidinally with a kind of a morbid preoccupation with Black male sexuality. But I'd like to start there because I know that both you and Bill Gunn have a deep and fertile creative relationship in countering a lot of these stereotypes in your work and deepening and broadening our understanding of just the scope of Black American experience and not narrowing it to these stereotypes. Could you talk about that a little bit in your relationship?
Well, I think we defied stereotypes. For example, I read in today's paper that Lin-Manuel Miranda had to apologize for not giving dark-skinned Latinos leading roles in the musical In the Heights. Is that that's what it's called? In the Heights. We had a black-skinned actress, Berta Mae Grosvenor, in Personal Problems, because that applies to the tradition of Black cinema as well.
Right.
Even the so-called race films that were produced by Blacks and directed by Blacks, the typical love interest was a light-skinned woman.
Mm-hmm.
So we chose Berta Mae for that role. Now, getting back to Bill Gunn did very well in Hollywood. If you look at his resume,
Mm-hmm.
he's not only an actor, he performed in movies, but he was also allowed to do some, he also cultivated other spots that have been traditionally off limits to Black directors and performers. I don't know what happened. I think it might have been the film Spot, which in Rhinestone Sharecropping is called Flash.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that he got in contact, or he got in connection with some corrupt producers, one of whom embezzled from the budget. There's a whole scene in there. They made Bill Gunn, I guess he was a young person at the time, head of this phantom company, this dummy company in the novel, and he had to take the fall for the embezzlement, or he had to take, held partially responsible for the embezzlement. So, I mean, that's what, I think that was a turning point in his career at Hollywood. And also, you know, he was, as you say, he was finally asked to do Black exploitation films. As a matter of fact, Ganja and Hess was supposed to be a Black exploitation film, but he defied that. And as a matter of fact, there's a parody, after watching it a few more times, there's a parody of the Black exploitation film in the movie. I don't think the producers got caught the joke.
Yeah.
You have this Superfly guy and his prostitute, Superfly type pimp and his prostitute, and they sort of like lure the vampire as a John into this entrapment, and he murders them, and gets a blood transfusion from their bodies. So I think that was Bill. Bill is constantly winking in his work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think this would happen with Hollywood and Bill. That film Stop, or in the movie, in the book it's called Flash, and he talks about the scene in Puerto Rico in the novel where the film was actually made.
That's right.
But I think reading his first novel and some other parts of his writing, I can see a parallel between Baldwin, James Baldwin, and Bill Gunn. I think they're probably the same generation.
Mm-hmm.
Baldwin said if he'd remained in the United States, he would kill somebody.
Mm-hmm. And
Bill Gunn becomes so frustrated that he has murderous intent. I'm glad that they will channel all this rage. But after Go Tell It on the Mountain, which was his blackest novel, and his first novel, I'm sure somebody in sales said, well, why don't you do white folks? And this is the same thing that occurs in Rhinestone Sharecropping, where the crooked producer says, well, we can't make any money with Black people. I mean, people don't want to be intimidated. Mm-hmm. They tell us. Remember that manifesto in Time magazine that Gates wrote, where he said, we're making people too anxious and they really want to get the credit out. You have to tone the stuff down. I mean, that's been with us for a while.
That's right.
Bill Gunn and Baldwin defied that. Baldwin ultimately wrote Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone, where he insults his sponsors, and Bill's insulting his sponsors was not only Ganja Hess, but Personal Problems, which I think is the greatest work, where he had the most independence. We left him alone. I sent him a fruitcake for Christmas, I think. But I said, listen, this is yours, do what you want. So he had full control of that film.
You mentioned a moment ago one of the stories inside the story of Bill Gunn's Ganja and Hess, which may not be immediately apparent to many of its casual viewers. And I'd like to hone in on that a little bit, Ishmael, because this is one of the folkloric elements that comes through the spirituals and blues and jazz that informs your writing and Bill Gunn's writing and his vision. That is to say, stories within inside a story that contain myriad meanings, but they're only apparent to those who are familiar with the tradition or with the blues impulse. We see this a lot of times in your work where a character, and also in Bill Gunn's work, may triumph over some potentially fatal adverse circumstances by employing their wits in such a way that it enables to turn the table on their aggressor or the person who might have it in for them. My point being, moreover, is that that technique is something that stretches back into the musical and theatrical traditions that inform both your work and Bill Gunn's work. Could you speak to us a little bit about that blues impulse, that jazz impulse?
No, I don't know. Blues is very flexible. As a matter of fact, I play a little jazz. I've been studying for 20 years or so, and went to a jazz school and studied under Mary Watkins, great pianist. And this is a scale that was brought from Africa. It's called a slave scale. It's a pentatonic minor, the blues, but it's very flexible. You can play it in every key. Mostly, most of the time, piano blues is done in B flat. That's why my new book of poetry is called Why the Black Hole Sings the Blues.
Yeah.
Because the astrophysicists monitored the sound of the black hole they discovered and took a picture of, and it was B flat, Yeah. So this is something that goes all the way back to West Africa.
Yes.
And it's something that's very flexible, and it's sort of like the poor man's psychiatry. No,
right.
I don't talk about psychiatry. Psychology or psychologists.
Yeah.
And people get bent to their emotions by finding the fellow feeling in the blues. You don't find this in jazz. Now in jazz, people take Tin Pan Alley songs and standards like Stardust or I Got You Under My Skin, and they play circles around them. They refer to them elliptically, like Bird and all that. But in the blues, you get mostly original songs. And it's all about it's about the working class, their everyday struggles, and people get a fellow feeling there. As a matter of fact, I just did a piece about blues, which is becoming extinct in Oakland, this great tradition, because of different things like redevelopment and all that, where they wiped out the 7th Street where the blues thrived. And I found that there's a great survival rate among blues musicians, as opposed to jazz musicians. There's a high mortality rate there, because one of the reasons I wrote that long poem and Why the Black Hole Sings the Blues, because I was struck by how many black jazz musicians did not survive beyond the age of 40. Hip hoppers, that's like genocide. I mean, that's like, if you could auto genocide or whatever you want to call it, self-inflicted, that's mayhem. If you go to Wikipedia and you look up hip hop slaves, it's like a long list, and it's growing because of the kind of competition, the guns available, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The blues people say, I asked the blues people, I said, one of the blues people, I said, why do you think blues musicians survive so long? He said, because we're family. So the blues is like our domestic psychologist, something that gives us confidence because it could be worse.
Right. Right.
I'm gonna wait for that 219 and take me away from here. Talking about suicide and depression, and you find a feeling, you find, well, maybe things aren't so bad at all. But Amiri Barak, I think, made a mistake when he said that the blues is about oppression. I mean, what about let the good times roll? I mean,
right.
You want it to be. But I think Baldwin and Gunn carried this tradition on page. And if you read
absolutely,
and if you read Baldwin, you'll find the characters that represent Baldwin, they're always listening to the blues. It's like Bessie Smith and other performers, Ma Rainey and people like that.
That's right. And in Bill Gunn's work, back to touching on rhinestone sharecropping, he uses blues and song as a way of organizing the plot points throughout the novel.
Mhm.
So oftentimes, getting back to the point you made, when there is a need for spiritual resuscitation or to revive and retain a self-image of the miracle of survival under duress, the narrative of the novel returns to song. Now, this happens in personal problems too, doesn't it? I mean, the film that the two of you made together.
We have
that's
Sam,
great.
we have Sam
Sorry.
Winnie not only singing doing the blues, but also spiritual.
Yes.
That hit that Spike Lee borrowed for his version of Ganja and Hess. That's the name of it. But you know, Spike Lee did a takeoff of Ganja and Hess. And he used one of Sam's spirit. I mean, it takes place in church, and that church scene is one of the most authentic that I've seen. And I love Sam doing that holiness dance. So I figured that he and Nina Simone probably went to these churches because he could do that dance. You see him?
Yeah.
Holiness dance. So I thought that was very authentic, and the idea that, like Baldwin in Go Tell the Mountain, the vampire finds his redemption through Christianity. Like the thrashing floor in Go Tell the Mountain, where Royal
that's right,
comes to terms with his rite of passage of becoming baptized. So there's a parallel there, which I thought was odd that this would be the resolution, but it's a magnificent film. Now, I think the main theme of Black Picture Show and Rhinestone Sharecropping is the corruption of Hollywood.
Yes.
And the limitations placed upon performers in Hollywood. And
That's
I think it's worse than when I think it was worse now than when he wrote those, made Ganja and Hess and wrote his books.
Yeah.
Well, one's a play, but both were plays originally. He asked me to publish it as a novel. Bill Gunn asked me to publish Rhinestone Sharecropping as a novel. But I think conditions are, as a matter of fact, I made the remark that in comparison to the kind of films made about blacks and TV, don't forget about television, right? D.W. Griffiths are progressive. Because
comparatively,
I don't recall an incest theme in Birth of a Nation. I haven't.
I see.
Maybe I missed something.
I see.
So The Color Purple and Precious. Which went beyond The Color Purple because it had both the mother and the father as pedophiles.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So I thought that, but I think that's the worst film ever made about Black life. And, the marketers were aware of that. Because I followed the marketing of the film for about a year and a half. And they said, well, how are we going to sell this to Black people because it's so offensive? So they got Oprah Winfrey and I think it was Lee Daniels and Oprah Winfrey to front for it. So when the distributors found that Oprah Winfrey gave the film her endorsement, I guess without seeing it, because anyway, they said, well, okay, we'll distribute this film. They said they couldn't make any money from The Great Debaters, which is about Melvin Tolson.
That's right.
An individual with cerebral excellence. I mean, one of the great poets of the 20th century.
Absolutely, Harlem Gallery.
As well as being a populist organizer. That was like hidden in that film, that he was able to organize both white and Black workers, Melvin Tolson. He's also the mayor of a town, I think in the Midwest. So they said, we can't make any money off a film like that, because in that film, a Black debating team bests the Harvard debating team. I mean, so he said, the people at the mall who buy the tickets to these movies, they're not going to go for that. Then he made The Bridge of St. Anna, Miracle of St. Anna by Spike Lee, which shows Black heroism on the Italian front during World War II. And they only show that film out here at 10:30 at night, one showing. So they said, we can't do, well, so what about Precious? We'll make money off of Precious. As a matter of fact, one person called it a gold mine of opportunity.
Mhm.
And so that's how that got over. So I think things have gone way in terms of minstrelsy and what Spike Lee calls coonery.
Mhm.
We're back in the 19th century, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. To demonstrate that are the parallel circumstance of extraordinary increase of violence
Mhm.
against blacks that runs side by side with this expansion in the so-called entertainment
That
industry
happened in Birth of a Nation.
of these propagandist images that again are rooted in the period immediately following Reconstruction, right? So
Monroe
you have
Trotter,
this.
yeah, Monroe Trotter was one of those who opposed Birth of a Nation. And people say, well, why are you so hung up on the media? You know, people who are asleep, I think they're not woke, they're asleep. I don't know about woke. But I said, well, this is probably a tradition that goes back to the 19th century, like a Black American poet criticizing Harper's Weekly for denigrating a Black battalion during the brigade or whatever. I get them all mixed up during the Civil War. Up into Monroe Trotter and others in ACP, there's always been a tradition of protesting the images that Hollywood gives us. Now, uh, we decided to do more than protest. That, I mean, you got like a library that may be 10 miles long full of books, a section library 10 miles long of books and reports about how Hollywood, discriminates against Asian Americans, Native Americans, blah, blah, on down blacks. We actually did something about it.
Right,
And we see ourselves as part of a tradition that goes back to the 1900s, the so-called race film. There
right.
were 500 made, no, excuse me, there were 500 made, about 100 survived.
Hmm.
And I have some of those race films. Like you talk about the chicken eating, black people stealing chickens. There's a film made in 1916 where Burt Williams does that old chicken joke. So this is
The
all
great
long.
Burt Williams.
The only difference is that the chickens are processed now. So in that Precious movie, this what's her name? Precious is running down the street with chickens. So we
Hmm.
don't have to jump over the fence no more
Hmm.
when the farmers are asleep.
Hmm.
Steal the chickens.
Hmm.
We get them at Kentucky Fried Chicken,
Hmm.
and we're running down the street with it. So
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a.
you'll go on.
Oh no, I was just going to mention it's extraordinary the absence of scholarship that would illuminate these very simple things. In
Mhm.
other words, what I'm saying is that it doesn't take a tremendous amount of research or effort to realize that these stereotypes and images are just being recycled again over the previous period in the 19th century when there was an acceleration of Black political self-determination and autonomy. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is here in the United States of America, anytime there's a period of acceleration of self-determination among Blacks in America, you have a backlash in the media that immediately propagates images of criminal backwardness and celebrates them. Now, getting back to Bill Gunn and your relationship with him and the fertility of that creative relationship, Bill Gunn was saying that again in Rhinestone Sharecropping, that system in Hollywood film and television was organized to keep Blacks in line by fear. It was designed to keep Black writers and Black directors and other talent that would otherwise plumb the depths of a richer and more variegated experience that we're having here in the country to something more narrow. So could you speak to that fear? Because clearly in Bill Gunn's case and obviously in your own, you've been able to overcome that. Have you felt that either one of you were financially or otherwise attempt to be coerced or blackmailed, as it were, or into capitulating?
Well, I think if you look at my sales figures for my books, I don't think you can accuse me of capitulating. Matter of fact, I have to go out of the country to get my books published. I have to go to Montreal. The last 5 books have been published in Montreal
Right.
by French Canadian nationalist Robin Philpott. So I mean, I can't. My solution to that whole thing about how Black writers and artists get trapped in the United States in this little cubby hole, or what I call a slave hole, or a little cabin near the
Mhm.
plantation,
Mhm.
is to go global. So I studied Japanese after I was
Ah,
left for literary roadkill after record eyeballing, right, which is and so I studied Japanese, and I wrote a novel called Japanese by Spring, which got me a tour of Japan,
great novel.
which was accepted for 4 years as a national project in China.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, they sent a scholar over here to spend a year, and most of my books are being published in China because
Mhm.
of that novel. And then I studied Hindi and wrote Conjugating Hindi or Conjugating Hindu, and which the plot. This
Right.
Black American progressive is pitted against an Indian conservative, right wing conservative. And so they go at it, and there's reconciliation at the end. So I found that my solution was to cultivate a global market or a global audience for my books. Matter of
Mhm.
fact, I've gotten prizes, literary prize in Japan, and also recently in Venice, the
Mhm.
Alberto De Vito Award in Venice.
Right.
So that was my idea. I said, well, Black writers are trapped. Right
Mhm.
now, it's life coaching.
Yeah, you're
You know,
not jiving, man.
which I call the new yoga. You know,
Yeah.
like, like everybody's trying to teach whites how to behave toward Black people,
Right.
like Emily Post or something like that. So we get these
Mhm.
books
Mhm.
out, and in a forthcoming article, I say, for example, that there are more James Baldwin imitators, impersonators, than Elvis impersonators, because all these guys were writing, letters to their nephews like Baldwin. But Baldwin was very slick, Baldwin had a lot of, even though he shot me down on his deathbed,
Yeah.
like, I mean, just out of the blue.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was
he was very smart, see, because he knew that the nephew was a little bit was not sophisticated enough to understand what he was saying. He talks
mhm.
about the course of innocence, the course of innocence.
Right.
He's talking to the cash register. He's talking about to the liberals looking over his shoulder. So I
Mhm.
think that's what happened there. But the thing about Bill Gunn and other people like that, including Lou Gossett, who said he can't get roles in Hollywood because he's considered difficult,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Is that they never sold out.
Right.
I mean, Bill Gunn, he did what he wanted to do with personal problems, and he had the freedom to do it. Now, what if somebody with like $5 million budget had
Mhm.
allowed him to do what he desired to do? Maybe we'd have the personal problems one to a series like on Netflix or something. But there was an invitation from one outfit. I won't mention who they were. That we make a serial out of personal problems and a
Mhm.
very lucrative offer. But we decided to end it there.
Mhm.
Those 3 hours,
Mhm.
with first People's Communication,
Mhm.
Bill Stevens, and then by Bill Gunn, and
Mhm.
and we were lucky to get all the talent like Robert Paul Dowery,
Mhm.
which Jake tells me that these film buffs really love, or connoisseurs, they really love the photography.
Mhm.
And at the time, we didn't know that some of these people would become iconic, like Walter Cotton,
Mhm.
who couldn't get a role because he was too light. He's not light enough, not Black enough, or one of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Another thing from Hollywood, right?
That's right.
He get a role. He was in a suit. He was one of these black. He was in one of these Black exploitation movies, and then they were featuring a scene with him in Cotton Comes to Harlem, but they cut it out because he didn't look Black enough. He wasn't authentic enough. The
Mhm.
producers decided. So we
Mhm.
got him. We got Polidori, who went on to become one of the photographers for the New Yorker magazine,
Mhm.
and was commissioned to do to photograph the restoration of the castle, the Palace of Versailles.
Mhm.
And he's a big time photographer. And then Carmen Moore, who gets commissions from presidents, and who's played before Gorbachev and has these orchestras. So Carmen Moore did a great score,
Mhm.
and the score was so terrific that it's been produced as a separate album apart from the film. So I mean, we had a lot of Sam Wayman, and Berta May. Berta May, we just had a Zoom memorial for Berta May. I talked to her up until her death.
Mhm.
We talked about her doing a one person theater piece. And Berta May expanded the role assigned to Black actresses.
Right.
They either
Right.
prostitutes or maids. They even got Abbey Lincoln to play a maid.
Huh.
And they got Lena Horne to
Uh-huh.
play like the mistress or something of some cowboy, Richard Widmark in a Western movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a disgrace, and that still goes on. That still goes on, except with the guns, it's gotten worse. Now, you were commenting about blind spotting,
Right.
where they had the sideshow.
The sideshows, right.
And see, we get that on 6 O'clock News.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why do they, why do they have to sideshows? Are they, where these guys do donuts with their cars?
That's right. Get some music out.
They have some music out. And I said, well, you know, they got that on 6 O'clock News. Why do they need? So there apparently is a great hunger among, you know, people with money and producers for that kind of product.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's clearly, again, getting back to the point I was making about the period following Reconstruction, you know, it's clearly related to the assertion of self-determination among Blacks in America to propagate and disseminate images of Blacks as criminals through the arteries of the corporate representatives of the ruling culture. I mean, certainly it's necessary on the part of Hollywood film and television in order to do this, because by comparison with, say, the mass shootings going on this year, there's been over 247 mass shootings in the United States this year. You know, symptomatic of a failed society, I should say. But these mass shootings are not being perpetrated by Blacks in the street.
No, it's symptomatic. It's symptomatic of a fear of a Black uprising.
You believe it's symptomatic of a fear of Black uprising?
Of course, if you look at the history of guns and guns legislation in the United States, it goes back to trying to prevent Indians, and first it was Indians, they wiped them out, and Blacks having guns because there were rebellions like the Stoner Rebellion and Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and some of the other people who were advocating armed revolt. That's still a fear. That's still a fear. And so when Lindsey Graham says, well, you know, I got to keep my guns.
Yeah.
I don't want no gang coming by my house without having some kind of protection. Well, he's not mentioning these white people who went and stormed the Capitol. So that's a gang.
There it is.
But which gang is he talking about?
Which gang is he talking about?
I mean, he kind of approved of the fact that these crazy people who are having a nervous breakdown over there having been a Black president. That's what this is all about. They didn't have a nerve. I wrote a book subtitled "America's Essays on America's a Nervous Breakdown." Of course, I couldn't get it published here.
Yeah,
but this is a mass. I'll tell you what. I've studied this. My new novel takes apart a couple of crazy ideas by the Puritans, right? Ever since the Puritan occupation of the United States, mass hysteria breaks out at any moment in this country.
That's true.
Now we got mass hysteria. You got people hallucinating about Jewish lasers coming on them, and
right.
You know, like Black people coming in neighborhoods and all this. And what do the capitalists do? They don't care about race. They have, I mean, you know, Romney has a Black grandchild, right?
That's right.
They don't. I mean, the people with money, billionaires, they don't. They have Blacks and Muslims and stuff in their extended families. They just feed this dog food stuff to these people, and these people have gone crazy. I mean, you know, they've lost all sense of reality because they believe that you know, there's going to be a Black takeover, and we're going to align ourselves with the Puerto Ricans. And you know, I miss the old days when busing was just a euphemism for Blacks. Don't you? You remember when Jesse Jackson said the bus is us?
Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, Lee Atwater, remember he said, don't be calling them by the N-word.
Yeah.
Euphemisms like busing, all this kind of stuff. Now, you know how they call Blacks now? Critical theory.
Oh, and all this.
Woke.
All this.
These are new names. See,
the new names. Drifting down from the academy like so much confetti.
Well, like Manhattan Institute and places like that, you know, where these guys sit around all day. People like John McWhorter, they sit around all day coming up with new ways.
He wants to talk about swear words now.
Oh yeah, well, I mean that's his thing. But, I mean, he said some
John
terrible.
McWhorter.
That right wing thing is always jumping on me. At least the Stormfront called me a whiny N word. That
Mm,
Nazi type. But
mm,
they have a little more cleverness. It's the
mhm,
flag they got called City Journal. But you know,
mm,
that's that thing. The man and Scaife,
mhm.
others,
Melandscape.
you know.
Yeah,
So that's how they call us nowadays. They don't have a nervous breakdown over the fact that Barack Obama was president.
that's it.
And people, you know, Latinx and blacks, they say, well, you people have 90%. Can we just have 85? You guys, can you just have 85% of everything, all the assets and resources and things? No, And then
Hmm.
that guy McClellan, the Senator McClellan, who's
Hmm.
1860s thinker.
Hmm.
This is the kind of guy you had, 100 years ago or so, like John Calhoun.
Hmm.
John
Hmm.
Calhoun started all this filibuster stuff because he didn't want the Northerners to take away the slaves. So I mean,
That's exactly
so,
it.
so when you say that we're going through the same period, you're right. You're correct.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to pivot a bit to bring us back to something that has characterized your work over the last 50 years. Now, you're one of a very few American writers whose scope of influence has extended itself internationally into all of the arts, dance, choreography, film, and television, as we've been talking about today. But also opera. More recently, the fashion runways in Europe. There was collections that were inspired by your work that were designed by Grace Wales Bonner. Many other mediums, painting, photography, sculpture. But I want to,
Grace Wells Bonner flew me to London. I played jazz piano to back up a
at the
concert.
show, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. That was one of the,
Beautiful.
Naomi Campbell did an Instagram. I said, I can die now. It was like,
So
that was great.
I wanted to mention that to our audience today, because again, getting back to the beginnings of this conversation and your creative relationship with Bill Gunn, which began in publishing and extended itself into this extraordinarily beautiful, far-reaching film, Personal Problems, it begins with some of your activities as a publisher. I have a early catalog here from I Read Books at the very beginnings of this. I think that it can be said that as a publisher and editor, among the many activities that you have committed to as an artist, as a publisher and an editor, I think you would probably have to be considered as important as, say, the first 50 years of James Laughlin, the founder of New Directions. But I bring this up because some of the other folks in here include who I mentioned, Colleen McElroy, Lorenzo Thomas, and Mary Baraka, who we talked about, Al Young, the current poet laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo, her first book, Calvin Hurton, Medicine Man, and then Leslie Sarr, the daughter of the great Betty Sarr, a very important artist, Leslie Sarr herself, her first book, Bill Gunn, who we've been talking about. And then at the center page, along with some activity by Steve Cannon, we read about, and this is where I'm coming from with the question, a series of cassettes that are called Personal Problems. And as I understand it, and you'll share with us today the origin story here, as I understand it, these cassette-only releases, before you and Bill Gunn began work on this extraordinary film, were actually the origins of Personal Problems, with more or less the same actors and same improvisational techniques. Or could you talk to us about that, Ishmael?
Yeah, we started off it started off as a radio series. I'm writing about
Radio series.
yeah. I was writing about my introduction to storytelling as a child. We lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and my first introduction was the comics in the Chattanooga Times when I was like, what, 2, 3? And then I had an aunt who personalized these soap operas. She referred to them as my stories. I said, they have this kind of appeal. I was wondering why she called them her stories, because they seem to, these everyday soap operas like Stella Dallas and Portia Faces Life, some of the others, connected to her experience, even though she was Black or maybe Native American, maybe mixed. And I think it was inevitable that I would do a soap opera. Of course, I call it an experiment. I think the first soap opera was Amos and Andy. And Amos and Andy worked so well on at night. They said, well, why don't we do a series like this about a family? That's one version I heard. So 1974, Steve Cannon, first of all, I began the publishing company as a dare. Somebody said, well, you can't, you got to go to I said, no, you can do it yourself. So the first book that we published was by Allison Mills, who was the babysitter on the Diana Carroll show. Julia, I think the show was called Julia.
Right,
and she was an actress in Los Angeles. And it was about her relationship with her filmmaker boyfriend, the late Francisco Newman. And it was just like giving people in love. And she talks about Hollywood. She talks about how the producers of Blazing Saddles were reading my novel, Yellowback.
That's right.
Yellowback Video broke down. And some other things. And Toni Morrison and William Denby loved the book, and and got very good critical praise. It's called Francisco. And she didn't write another novel until she raised her children. She raised 5 children. They're all achievers, doctors, lawyers, and now she's then she became like a born again Christian, and now she's a Christian minister and a chaplain in a women's prison. And then we started publishing books after that. May Bursenberger, for example, Random Possession.
Right.
She's a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize this year.
That's right.
The Bulletin Award, $100,000. So we published a distinguished list, Victor Hernandez Cruz and others, Julio Marzan, and multicultural list. And then, we came in contact with Bill Gunn. He asked me to publish, Rhinestone Sharecropping, which I was glad to do.
Oh, yeah.
And it got a great review in, what was that old magazine, Essence? I think it was, Essence, one Black magazine. It got a few good reviews. And so we went through this for, 79 was a radio series. Terry McMillan was part of the radio series. He was one student of mine. Very famous as a novelist, and some of her novels have been adapted into films like Waiting to Exhale, Mothers. So she played a part because she had moved to New York and was part of the John Henry Clark.
But she was one of the original players in Personal Problems.
Yeah, on the radio.
Before the film.
Yeah.
I see.
And Bill Stevens played a part, and Berta May was there. And so I called up Steve. I said, I'm having a lot of people call me up. People call me up, tell me their personal problems, and to give me their resumes, to keep me informed.
Yeah.
People who win well, I don't say that. People with the Pulitzer Prize, or they call me right away. I'm the first one to tell that they got it. I'm out here on 53rd Street, this Black ghetto. So I don't know what that means, but people tell me about their personal problems. My mother was good at this, and I told my mother, "Why don't you charge $35 an hour?" These people call me. She said, "I'm a Christian. That would be wrong." But I guess it runs in the family. So I said, "Steve, why don't we do a soap opera called Personal Problems? Because you got this radio show," and that's how it began. That was the origin of it.
And so, just to clarify here, so as I pointed out in the catalog that I showed our audience here, the novel and Black Picture Show were already being published, and this was when Bill Gunn became aware of the soap opera that you were releasing on cassette, and then it moved from there to the film project?
Joe Johnson got us Bill Gunn. Joe Johnson, the late poet, Joe Johnson. We were all in Umbra Workshop together.
Umbra Workshop, right.
Which produced Lorenzo Thomas and Tom Dent and a lot of people, And I had met Steve before that, So he had a radio show,
I see.
and he's the one who began the series.
I see.
And then, we got Bill Gunn, Joe Johnson, knew Kathleen Collins, and Bill Gunn.
I see.
And Kathleen Collins translated a book for me
Mm-hmm.
called The Crisis of Possession in Voodoo,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
written by the ambassador to the United States.
Price Mars, Louis
Price
Price
Mars.
Mars. Yeah.
His father was the famous, ambassador also, I believe.
Yeah.
And so this is the idea of applying psychiatric technique, using voodoo and combining them with psychiatric techniques.
Yeah.
And the theory of that book was used by Kathleen Collins in her movie, her film.
Huh. Huh.
And so she translated that for me.
Huh.
And so we got Robert Polidori through Kip Hanrahan,
Mm-hmm.
the producer of American Cloudy Records.
Mm-hmm.
Kip had taken my poetry and songs and gotten people like Carla Bley, Alan Toussaint, and Taj Mahal and others to set up these songs and music. Out of this collaboration came tours of Europe and Japan, and most recently 2013 Sardinia Jazz Festival. These people formed David Murray and a whole lot of great.
Now, is that Kip that improvises that scene with you in your cameo in Personal Problems?
He plays the
hippie cat.
white hippie progressive.
Yeah, we're putting you down for wearing a tie.
Well, I play the manager of a hot dog.
Right.
One line I have in there, like that I remember. This guy don't like, man, what's wrong with you? Do you don't like hot dogs? But we had a lot of fun with that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say it's one of the most delightful aspects of the film, Personal Problems, that you made with Bill Gunn is that sense of improvisation brings a lot of joy.
Well, see, this came on the heels that while we were filming that in New York, PBS had invited me to come to New York and endorse Reagan.
That's how that scene came out?
The very famous black woman novelist said I would probably endorse Reagan. I said, no, I ain't endorsing Reagan. They had this crew and everything come down there and asked me to endorse. I said, I ain't endorsing no Reagan. That's Stanley Crouch's job, man. Stanley Crouch
Oh, no.
Endorse Reagan because he said we needed a strong leadership.
Oh.
But anyway, God bless Stanley, expired. But anyway, that was the joke in the film, in Personal Problems. That scene, the nightclub scene, going back and forth.
Yeah.
So,
great early scene in the film.
Kip Hanrahan got us Polidori.
There's a great sense of gentleness and kindness in the film Personal Problems as well. Do you see that as largely absent from contemporary filmmaking that deals with Black life in America? Because I haven't seen that in a long time, man. I mean, there were glimpses of that in The Last Black Man in San Francisco, but what I'm saying is this spirituality and warmth, the gentleness and the kindness and regard with which the characters that you and Bill Gunn created interact and treat each other. I haven't seen this in a long time, man. I mean, you're a very careful observer, a very sharp, trenchant observer of media in the United States and America. Do you see this anywhere showing up?
Bill Gunn didn't have the kind of meanness that you have to have when you in Hollywood and places like that. You really have to. This cutthroat you see among Black artists, and I have this in my new play, which is opening in December at the Theater for the New City. And I always wanted to write a play about black painters who in such a fierce competition they killed one kills based upon my experience in New York. And there, what happens in the establishment is that there are only places for a few artists, and you see it in theater, like they gave Katori Hall the Pulitzer Prize.
Right.
Mary Baraka, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, Ed Buller, they never got one of those.
Nope.
So there are people who do not know the Black experience, who have a monopoly over selecting those who allegedly represent the Black experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of money. For example, I see a lot of tokens being created at the Atlantic Monthly.
Mm.
This the person who owns the Atlantic Monthly is a billionaire. I mean, sure. So they, and the Manhattan, we've mentioned the Manhattan Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot of money from the right-wing companies, oil companies and all that. And so they're able to field tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And as I told you, we talk about this. Everything west of the Rockies is seen as a place inhabited by surfboards, cactus, and rattlesnakes.
Mm-hmm.
So people at the Times, which more and more it looks like a hometown paper, just write off everything beyond.
It's so true.
So true. Yeah, right. So this leads to a lot of cutthroat competition. Now, this is ironic, and I don't want to sound like a nativist, but I don't know if you noticed that they've chosen mostly Nigerian actors to play African-American roles, like in Harriet Tubman and Tina Turner. And
an enormous trend. Even Martin Luther King
Martin Luther King
performed by
with a British accent.
Yeah.
I said, this is very interesting that in one of these which has become big business, the slave product, I mean, making money off of slavery.
Oh, it's enormous industry. It's a cottage industry now.
So one of these slavery movies, African actors play African Americans. So I told Angela Davis, considering the fact that some of the ancestors might have sold us into slavery, they got paid twice. And I asked a famous theater person, aren't black Americans getting upset, traditional black Americans actors getting upset? He said, yeah, they're upset, but they can't say anything because they feel they lose their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But that just shows you the power.
That fear.
The fear. And so I guess, Bill Gunn had enough.
Yeah, Bill Gunn, and again in Rhinestone Sharecropping, he says it's organized by fear.
Mm-hmm.
You get into a certain avenue or lane or whatever metaphor you choose financially, and then it's extortion from there on out. I mean, if that's what you're going to do, if that's the route you're going to go.
Well, we use primitive equipment. And recently I asked Robert Polidori, who said he thought it was great working with Bill Gunn because of the way he handled the actors. And, one of the reasons this film looks more authentic than a lot of films about Black actors or Black life is that we didn't write it. We wrote treatments. I was the executive producer. It was my idea. I suggested the storyline. I acted in it. You understand? Mm-hmm. And handle the money and the whole thing from out here in California. And I would go to New York and appear in scenes and things and make suggestions. So the actors acted on the basis of treatments. And so when they actually have the freedom to define their roles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It creates a real expansive sense, within the film. Not just of their humanity, but the rhythm and the pulse of the expression, again, containing those qualities that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, that are traditional within the music.
These films are made for people with, American movie audiences are programmed to have the attention of a gnat.
Yeah.
And so people were puzzled by this because it takes its time. Bill takes his time, as in the exposition. And we showed it at the New School of Social Research. And, you had a who's who of Black critics and people who appeared on television, and they just didn't know what to make of it. You know, there was silence. And then we showed it at the Pacific Film Archives, and people got up and walked out. I took a photograph of people getting up, walking out.
Wow. In response to what you were describing about the screenings and the aesthetic of the film as moving in real time, some master directors have been able to implement this strategy with great success. I mentioned Wim Wenders, but in a more classical model, I guess Antonioni would be somebody who was able to do this. But you're saying that American audiences just can't handle that more, shall we say, lifelike pace?
Well, no, the pace. I'm talking about the timing and the pace.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been programmed by films like Fast and Furious and Boots Riley. I presented him with an award. They had all these Hollywood people in the audience over here in San Francisco, and I said, "You guys have allowed special effects to take over." That was that was a complaint by Lou Gossett when we interviewed him. He said he came to Hollywood to play characters.
Mm-hmm.
So now you got these kids with pink hair and all this, and these computers and things who are like have taken over. The special effects have taken over.
Yeah.
So I think that's why Personal Problems was greeted by people who are not accustomed to that kind of film. Now when they showed it on WNYC, we got a very good response.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, Verta Mae Grosvenor got on the bus, and the bus driver called her by her character's name, Johnny Mae Brown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we thought we had something, and then I went to PBS in Washington, and I thought that maybe they would pick it up. Mm-hmm. And one of the producers there went into a tirade at ad hominem attack on Bill Gunn and Kathleen Collins. She derisively referred to them as the Hudson River School, and all kinds of pejorative, referred to in all kinds of pejorative manner, and to both of them. Mm-hmm. And so I was really down when I got on the train going back to New York. I said, this is not going to work. Mm-hmm. She got her justice. She went on to be one of the producers of Ken Burns' Civil Wars. Mm-hmm. Which was sort of like such an ode to the Confederacy.
Yeah.
That the Sons of the Confederacy made Ken.
Oh yeah, no.
Ken Burns an honorary member. Like the idea that here come these Yankees down here. Our slaves love us. The idea of the Northern invasion.
Yeah.
That theory, that old lost cause thing that he snuck in there. So anyway.
Sound like Horton Foote.
We did a few more showings and did a tour. I think we went to Buffalo, Rochester, went up to Appalachia, 3 hours from Louisville, I think. And then there were the tapes in the attic that we held for 30 years. And then Jake Perlin was one who was responsible for the revival. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, those tapes would have been faded and probably vanished or disappeared, which is what happened to those Black films, the race films.
Mm-hmm. I guess many people in our audience will be curious about the future filmmaking possibilities coming from Ishmael Reed. I know your most recent play, The Slave Who Loved Caviar, about Jean-Michel Basquiat, will be coming back to the New Yorican. The previous play...
No, it's going to be at the Theater for the New City.
Oh, it's Theater for the New City. Okay. I was thinking of its premiere at New Yorican. Haunting of Lin-Manuel Miranda was enormous success. What about filmmaking?
Well, if I said on the basis of the fact that we did Personal Problems for $40,000 budget, we could do Quo Vadis for $100,000 with the chariots and all. So we just don't get the kind of, it's very difficult for us to get grants because of the kind of stuff we do. We're supposed to say, oh, boss, we're so glad to be here. Oh, Lord have mercy. Hallelujah. Would you like me to sing a spiritual? That kind of stuff. get real toned down, like this play this young woman wrote about Martin Luther King engaged in a pillow fight or flirting with some fictional hotel maid on the eve of assassination. They like stuff like that. So it's got to be black boogeyman stuff. You know what I mean? It just got more and more extreme. Where there's going to be a movie where a black guy's going to play King Kong instead of the gorilla. Watch.
No gorilla suit necessary.
I shouldn't say that because the producer's going to hear that and say, yeah, that's a good idea. So, the whole thing. I mean, I wrote a song. I guess it's passé now. I wrote a song called Bitter Chocolate. And the line is, only the Redskins know what I don't know, and they ain't talking. So I think black men rank around there in terms of classification or stratification. And I think, was it William Burroughs? William Burroughs said, nevertheless, William Burroughs, I think, said, the sweetest sounds come from hell. So that's our position in society. Nobody can tell our story but us.
That's right. That's right.